During the combine, Jordan Addison said about the Steelers, "Come get me." Of course, reuniting Addison with his former quarterback and Kenny Pickett. We're going to talk about that, as well as the Bud Dupree question and some other things going on with a story about the Steelers' discipline, as well as the salary cap situation playing out. All that and more right here on Locked On Steelers. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Alan Saunders of Steelers Now. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app, as well as YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this video if you want to get subscribe to this channel, if you want to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As I said before, we're joined by Alan Saunders. He's back home in Pittsburgh of SteelersNow.com. You can check all his work out there. I'm still here in Greensboro, North Carolina, at least for another day. Pitt was able to hold off Georgia Tech on the Tuesday game, and they moved to play Duke, where I'll be covering that game along with my partner Noah Hiles for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But focusing on the Steelers, one thing I didn't get to in my combine coverage, because there were so many other things that happened and that I thought were a little bit more important with position-wise, was Jordan Addison, of course, former Pitt wide receiver who played for USC last season, basically being asked about the Steelers and reuniting with Kenny Pickett, and he said, "Come get me." And of course, that just threw everyone into a lot of tweets and a lot of social media stuff, playing that up. Alan, we both saw Jordan play for Pitt, and we both know that he is a guy that likes the spotlight and likes to make those kind of statements. But is the move to go get Jordan Addison? And if you were, where would you go get him at? Because everyone saw his combine performance; they weren't wowed by it that much. I told people that the combine wasn't going to be where he exploded. It's really his on-field play. Is he a guy that you're looking at early on for the Steelers?
Yes, he is. And I think wide receiver is a position where the Steelers have some bodies, and I think there are two positions that fit this mold, right? Where, like, if we look at them on defense, at corner, at linebacker, at defensive tackle, at defensive end, at outside linebacker, at safety, there's just not enough guys, right? There's a math problem, right? They're short of players. I think the two positions on offense where they have players but could get better are wide receiver and offensive line, right? They're bringing back all five of their offensive line. They have George Pickens and Deontay Johnson, obviously. They have Calvin Austin, kind of a mystery as to what he could be. Aren't a lot of guys his size that have had a lot of success as like starting type receivers in the NFL. Certainly could be at least a good supplementary piece. They have Anthony Miller, missed all last season with an injury. They like him, but who knows where he will be come training camp time. So I think if you're looking to, they don't need a body, right? They don't need to go get a guy in the 6th round. They don't even have a 6th-round pick, but to just they don't need to like fill the wide receiver room like they do those other places. But I think they are short on talent in the wide receiver room, short on established talent, certainly. And the first 2 days of the draft are where they could add to that. I think Jordan Addison is a very realistic option for the Steelers. I think he fits their needs really well. I think there are other ones too. I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba, you could say all those same things about, and then I can also say he had a really good combine, which I can't say about Jordan Addison.
He lit it up.
And so Zay Flowers, I think, is another guy who really sort of just, I mean, those are three fairly similar receivers that I think would look pretty good for the Steelers in that slot spot that they don't really have. They have a couple options for, but they don't really have a sure thing answer for right now. I think the question becomes, how much work can they get done in free agency to take care of some of those numbers problems, where the idea of using one of those early day picks, day 1, day 2 picks on a position like wide receiver or tackle is plausible. I think that's the big question.
No, I get that. I think that I think for me, like, wide receiver, it's certainly you want to add there, and you always want to get younger there, because wide receivers get expensive when they start to get paid. I mean, Deontay Johnson's contract isn't that expensive in comparison to other wide receivers, but it's still a good chunk of the salary cap. And so you kind of want to get ahead of the game and make sure that you're getting good young ones to work with your quarterback. But I'm kind of where you are about the other positional needs. Like, you're in that with that set, like with 17th overall, I'm not so sure I would take Jordan Addison right now. I think that that's a position where if you stay there, most likely there's going to be a corner, a defensive lineman, and an offensive lineman. I think that fits better than Jordan Addison at that point. I also think at 32, it'd be very intriguing to see if he's still there and if it's Jaxon Smith-Njigba is still there, if to take the shot there. But I also, we were talking about this with Matt Williamson yesterday on the show about the possibility of adding a tight end somewhere in that second round. And your tight end could run a lot more 12 personnel sets. You can then also, start using Pat Freiermuth more in the slot because he's more of a receiving tight end anyways. And then that way you're adding an extra blocker as well as an extra receiver to the game. And, and you could still add a wide receiver late in the draft and see how that goes. And then also see how Calvin Austin comes back next year. I do agree that you shouldn't bank on Calvin Austin to just be a super playmaker after his injury or anything like that. But I do think that whereas slot receiver is a need, I rank it behind a lot of other needs that they already have.
I think it's certainly one that if they're going to address, it needs to be done early, though, because in the later rounds, you're just going to get another, I don't know, right? You're just going to get another Anthony Miller, another Calvin Austin. If you're going to do it, you kind of got to do it early. I do like the idea of taking a tight end. It's a very deep tight end class. That's the other part about that conversation. I don't think it's an especially deep wide receiver class. Like there's 4 or 5 like those. So we talked about those 3 guys. Quentin Johnson to me is the number 1 receiver in this class. He's the only guy in that top group that I think is a starting outside receiver in the NFL from TCU. Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee. You can probably kind of lump in with that group. I'm not as big of a fan of his work as some people are, but I think he probably is in there. After that, I'm not sure you're getting a sure thing answer after like wide receiver 5 in this class. Now, it'll really depend on what happens. I am of the belief that this wide receiver class, although it's not that good, is still going to get drafted really highly because it's a terrible wide receiver free agent class, and there's lots of teams that need them. And so I just think need is going to drive these guys up draft boards. Like you're talking about Jordan Addison at 32. I would be a little bit before the combine. I was thinking he wasn't going to be there at 17. Now maybe I could see him being there at 17 a little bit more reasonably, but I would be surprised if he's there at 32. I just think the wide receivers are going to be in demand, even though they're not necessarily like superstar caliber guys. You could fill that role with a tight end, though. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a good point. And it is a very deep tight end class. Certainly a lot of guys that could fit in a number of spots, but if they're going to take offensive players, and I think offensive line is really in the same boat here, it will be, to me, like day 1, day 2. Those are the places to take them just because they do have bodies and they need impact. They don't need numbers.
I hear you on that. I think that's even a good point. They need people to address it. And like you said, there's question marks in the wide receiver room. And that's one thing I always say at the start of every season is who's a question mark and who's an exclamation point. And let's face it, Calvin Austin, Anthony Miller, the guys they're bringing back, they're question marks. They're not guys that you can count on. I think that George Pickens has the possibility to be an exclamation point. I think that Deontay Johnson, if he can score touchdowns next year, he will be. I think still he's a good receiver. They just need to put it together with a young quarterback. But giving Kenny Pickett another weapon, I wouldn't be against it. How they did it, that's what I'd be interested in, because I still think that this team, to be the best version of this team that I think it's going to be, I think that they need to get stronger on both sides of the trenches. I think they need a young corner that's going to learn behind Cam Sutton, and I think they need a linebacker who can come in and learn behind Miles Jack and come through. But that being said, like you said, there's a lot of different places where new bodies could help. We'll talk about where an old body could return to the team. Something we've discussed on this show before in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about FanDuel. And of course, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook app. You better get on FanDuel today. And with the NBA season back and rocking, this is your chance to get in if you're a new customer for FanDuel Sportsbook, because you can use the no sweat first bet. That gives you up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if you don't win your first bet on FanDuel Sportsbook. Then all you have to do is just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use, and then you can bet anything that you want on the money line, on point scores, on threes drained. FanDuel also lets you make player prop bets to give you more options, and you can also combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay options. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, I wanted to talk to you about this possibility that we keep bringing up. I mentioned it about a month ago on this show about the possibility of just looking at Bud Dupree's contract numbers, his salary cap hit. I was looking like, man, the Titans ain't going to want to pay that for the output that he's given them the last 2 years and the injury concerns he's brought. They're going to let him go. And there's rumors kicking around that is going to happen. But now the question is, even if that does happen, should the Steelers be really quickly in on Bud Dupree? And if they are, what's the the cap hit number that he has to get to for this to be okay for the Steelers? Because you've talked on the show about how the salary cap is a concern this offseason.
Yeah, it's not like they have just money to blow. And
Right.
I think, but I don't consider a third outside linebacker to be some kind of like exorbitant luxury either, right? Like this is a player that plays a lot. TJ Watt plays approaching 80% of the snaps sometimes, which is a lot for an edge rusher. Expecting Alex Highsmith to do that, I think you saw that maybe he wasn't necessarily always as fresh as you'd want him to be this year when he had to step up a little bit. So, I mean, there's a little bit of simple math here. Like 180 and 170, that means half the time you have your third outside linebacker in the game, right? And so that's an important part of the Steelers' defense. It's not just, safety where you got a guy back there in a half field and you hope the ball never goes to him, right? Like without pass rush, the whole Steelers defense doesn't work. So I think we saw this year how crucial depth at that position is going to be for the team, not just for injuries, but for the ability to have functional depth so they can rotate a third guy in. So I think a guy like Bud Dupree, whether it's him or somebody else, is absolutely something that they should be looking into this offseason. We talked about the math problem. There are just more holes than they have draft picks. Some of this stuff is going to have to be taken care of free agency. Could they take care of that in the draft instead? And maybe they want to sign Tremaine Edmonds with that money and then, decide, okay, we're set with linebacker in the draft and we're going to move to edge. Absolutely. Like there's different ways to approach this problem, but I think Bud Dupree is a good solution to one of their spots anyway. As far as the money, I don't know that he's going to want – I think the bigger thing will be whether he'll want an opportunity where he knows he's not going to start, right? Or even really have the ability to win a starting job, right? Like he knows he's not going to beat those guys out. So I think that would be, to me, the bigger stumbling block than money. I mean, he's getting paid his signing bonus from Tennessee still. So he's kind of already taken care of in some ways. This would be, if I'm Bud Dupree, to me, this is like, okay, this can be my prove it year. Still got checks coming in from Nashville. I can go give some contender a break on a contract to go be their starting edge rusher and prove myself again that I can stay healthy and I can do this job and then go get another big contract. So to me, signing up to be the Steelers number 3 doesn't make a ton of sense for Bud, but I think it makes a lot of sense for the Steelers.
I get you there, and if you're Bud Dupree, you probably do want to prove that you can still start in the NFL and make starting money, because it's not like he's super old. He can still be a playmaker, and there's plenty of edge rushers out there like Melvin Ingram who are like 34 years old. Carlos Dunlap. It's a position that if you stay fit for, and Bud Dupree is a very fit and explosive individual, you can still be a threat into your older years in the NFL. So I do think you have a point there. Bud Dupree's coming back to the Steelers might not be halted as much by money, but by him wanting to prove that he's still that guy off the edge.
The other thing I'll say about that is like I would be really surprised if this is something that happens next week. Okay. But the longer he's on the market, maybe come back to this question after the draft. If he's still hanging around, then maybe that would be a place where like, okay, I can just jump in. Doesn't matter if I miss OTAs. I know that defense. This is still a good fit for me. But it has to happen first that he didn't find that opportunity he was really looking for.
No, I feel you on that, because if you look at how free agency often does play out, there's those guys that fly off the board, and then we wait weeks as we wait to see how things happen out. Terrell Edmonds took time before he signed back with the Steelers last year. That kind of stuff happens, and this is going to be an interesting edge rushing free agent class, because you got guys at the top of the list. Frank Clark's the guy that everyone's been talking about, but Yannick Ngakoue, Jadeveon Clowney, Cleveland Farrell, Melvin Ingram is back on the market. There's a lot of guys like that. Justin Houston is back out there at 34 years old. Marcus Davenport from the Saints, Dante Fowler from the Cowboys. There's a lot of names like that.
He's one of it. Just got to mention the local guy.
Okay? You love Chase Vinovich, man.
Hashtag from here. It has to be mentioned. Okay.
Man, Chase Vinovich. Yes, he is also out there as an option. But again, there's a lot of options out here, and I guess it's always interesting because I always look for each position who goes first, because whoever goes first usually sets the market for everyone else, and then it just falls down from there. And you're right, like if like 4 of the 5 guys get signed and Bud Dupree's still sitting there, and then the rest of the guys start signing smaller contracts, that might be a hurt piece for Dupree. But I also wonder if it could be like if he signs like a 2-year deal or even a 1-year deal where he's like, look, I just want to prove that I can do it, do this thing still. And then if he's at the 3rd edge rusher for the Steelers and he gets 6 sacks or something like that, someone might say, hey, you know what? Maybe he does still have it. And a lot of guys out there, like Melvin Ingram, like Justin Houston, they're just signing big 1-year deals year after year. And they're just like, I'm going to keep proving, I'm going to keep being healthy, and I'm going to get out there and make this money here on this deal. And I think that, like you said, 1, he's receiving his signing bonus money from the Titans, but 2, he's also I think he has the chance to make that kind of money. So you look at that. What is the most realistic path for the Steelers to find a good 3rd edge rusher this year? Is it Dupree, another free agent, or do they get it in the draft this year? Or do they not? Is it just going to be a weakness that you think it just persists into next season?
Like, I can see that happening just because it's not this especially deep draft class in that regard. We haven't seen the Steelers show a lot of obvious draft interest in the edge rushing guys.
True.
Wasn't like a lot of those guys at the combine were on their meetings list. We'll see when we get into like top 30 visits and who goes to what pro day, if that continues, or maybe we'll see some changes in that regard. But right now it does not feel like the Steelers are aggressively targeting edge rushers like they are, say, defensive linemen and inside linebackers. So it doesn't feel like the Steelers have identified it as a pressing draft need as some of their other ones. So maybe it will go by the wayside, or maybe they're just doing that because they've decided that they're going to address that in free agency no matter what. And, they'll find their guy and it doesn't matter. Or it's a position that they feel like they can wait until later in the offseason. I mean, they tried to do that last year when they brought in Malik Reed kind of at the last minute. Now, that didn't work out very well, but, maybe it's a position they feel like they can wait on and see. Maybe there's a Bud Dupree hanging around. Maybe there's somebody else hanging around in the offseason. They also brought Quincy Roche back, and I think, he's a wild card. He's not what did you say, exclamation point, a question mark? He's a question mark? Okay, but he's a question mark that had, I thought, a lot of upside coming out of Miami. So we'll see what he can bring to the table as well.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I think a lot of Steelers fans were upset that they let him get snatched up from the practice squad. So that does make sense there. I do think it's going to be interesting to see where the Steelers are okay with this position landing. Are they okay with it right now? Do they try to make an aggressive move? Do they just kind of get somebody and hope for the best? Do they leave the question mark there at the end of the season? Those are all things I think that Omar Khan is going to be considering, but I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility for them to draft another edge, because I do think there would be some interesting options if they were sitting there in the second round or the third round, and an edge is just the best player available, and they're just like, let's just get one and just see what happens, because Andy Weidel loved building those rotations up front for the Eagles where they just had bodies on bodies just coming after people. And maybe that's part of the ticket for the Steelers to not just have got enough guys so that there's always a competent and talented pass rusher coming at you, regardless of the down and distance, because they have that rotation going on.
One last thing on this, and there may be an answer on the roster here. They drafted DeMarvin Leal as this tweener guy, and he played a lot of edge last year. If DeMarvin Leal shows up at OTAs and cut 20 pounds, and then I think that maybe that's the guy. Like that's a possibility here as well.
I agree. That's also a possibility. We'll keep an eye on that possibility. But next, I want to talk to Alan about some things he's been writing on SteelersNow.com. One pertaining to the Steelers' discipline. They were the most fined team in the NFL last year. Let's talk about those numbers and what that meant. And does that mean they have a discipline problem? Right after this. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined by Alan Saunders from SteelersNow.com. Alan, you wrote a piece on SteelersNow.com about this situation. It was reported that the Steelers, according to a study from gambling.com, were fined $196,480. That is the most in the NFL. And, there could be a lot about this. But something that you pointed out is that most of it stems from one primary act that the Steelers seemed happy to be fined for. Can you break this down for us?
Yeah, so it was in the Indianapolis Colts game. James Pierre intercepted, I guess it was Matt Ryan, right? And then, the Steelers have been doing all year this celebration, but way back to training camp, where the guy who got the interception would run over to the sideline and throw the ball up like it's like a target pigeon, and all the rest of the linemen would go and try to shoot it.
Yeah, they'd pretend to shoot it. It was why they kept doing it to Kenny Pickett in training camp, and I was just like, man, y'all are doing a lot.
Yes, and so all season they did it, and they did it on their own sideline. This time they did it in the end zone. I don't think they're going to do that again because 13 guys got fined about $100,000. I think it might have been more than 100, total. 100, more than half of their total fine for the year, which made them the most fined team in the NFL, was from one celebration. So when you look at the penalties, which are really, when you're looking at the team, like the thing that is the more pressing matter, they had the 6th fewest penalty yards against in the NFL. So I don't think they are a team that lacks discipline, but I do think there were some pretty noteworthy examples this year of some guys just not using their heads. I don't think we on this podcast need to revisit the bus ticket situation.
No, we have gone over how much Marcus Allen.
But he was fine. Okay, so he's on the fine list for that. There was, George Pickens got ejected for a scrum after an onside kick. There were 2 fights against the Buffalo Bills, right? There was I don't know if you want to call it a discipline problem, but I think there were enough notable connected incidents here where you can say the Steelers did some dumb stuff on the field in 2022, and they didn't really hurt the team that badly by doing any of it. So I don't know if it's that big of a deal, but it certainly are all things that happened and things that show up when you add up all the fines. And you go, oh, yeah, that, and then, yep, that. And then it was very few a bad hit that led to a personal foul that hurt the team and also a fine. It wasn't a lot of that stuff. It was a lot of not thinking stuff. And so, I don't know, if you want to hold Mike Tomlin's feet to the fire for some not thinking stuff that doesn't really hurt the team that badly, I think maybe that could be your thing. It's not really mine, though. I want to know what your take is on this. I wrote the story. What do you think about this?
It makes sense that it all comes from that one thing when you add up all the numbers. But I mean, like you said, discipline wasn't a problem for this team this year. Sure, there were those moments, but the fight that happened again against the Bills, Kenny Pickett took a low hit that he thought was a little messed up. He pushed the guy, and then the whole team rushed to defend their quarterback. And you know what? like you said, that game was well over in hand. I think it's better that they rush to defend him. And like, there was that whole thing about how last year, remember when, Ben Roethlisberger wasn't getting helped up by his offensive lineman. Everyone's like, oh, do they even care about him? They obviously cared about Kenny. And I think that's a good sign for this, the trajectory that they're on as far as the chemistry that the team has. So I'm with you. I think this is, when you look at, like, what'd you say, the sixth least penalized team
by yards. Yeah.
By yards. I mean, that to me shows discipline. And I've always thought that, like, when someone points to one individual, it's like using anecdotes to beat data when it comes to this, when it comes to, stacking up a long season of penalties. And sure, there's going to be boneheaded moments by everybody. Like, everyone's saying, oh, Marcus Allen, you that, this, that, and the third. But when you compare it to everyone else's boneheaded penalties across the league, one guy doing that, and it's not to excuse Marcus Allen to say that he shouldn't have done it, but this is the game of football where there's a lot of passion, a lot of fire, a lot of violence, a lot of trash talking, and there's 53 guys in general that you got to account for on every single team, and anybody could have a bad day, a bad moment, a bad anything, and do something stupid, and it happens. But I think the better teams are the teams that limit how few times that they are that stupid. And sure, there's times that they do stupid things, but like the thing that earned them over $100,000 of those fines was just a simple celebration in a game that they won, and not one that really cost them that much. So, like,
they didn't get penalized for that one.
And they didn't even get penalized for it. So yeah. I feel like if anyone's trying to spin it in that direction, I think they're working a little bit overtime to say, oh, this is a big problem. I think it's something that, they'll probably not do next year, but I need to see a lot more. I need to see a lot more problems next year for this to actually be a thing.
Yeah, the fine thing has been a little bit of a trend. So so over the last 5 years, they're the fourth most fined team in the NFL. So that has been a little bit of a trend. Sure. The penalties have not, though. And I think that, to me, if you got to pick one of those, man, I mean, hey, it's the players' money. They want to do dumb stuff that costs them money.
Right.
Does it look bad sometimes? Like, do I wish they didn't do it? Yeah, but at the end of the day, like, I'm more focused on things that hurt the team and the team's goals, and this stuff is not that. Also, just want to point out, this does not include the fine for Devontae Casey's suspension.
Right.
His DUI, because that happened while he was with Dallas, even though he served it this year with
right. It does not count there. My last thing I wanted to touch on with you, Alan. That was weird. But the last thing I wanted to touch on with you, Alan, was the situation that the Steelers are in, with a lot of teams are going to be buying quarterbacks in free agency. A lot of teams can be making these moves. What is the impact on Pitt's plans right now, the Steelers' plans right now, as far as how they're going to try to attack the quarterback? Because yes, Kenny Pickett's on the roster, but Mitch Trubisky's on there for $10 million, and they need a third quarterback option. Is this something that could benefit the Steelers as far as how they can rebuild and other teams have to spend, or is this going to become a problem as they try to fill out that quarterback room?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quarterback market for average quarterbacks is kind of off the charts right now. You saw what guys like Daniel Jones and Derek Carr and Geno Smith got this week, 35-40 million. Like, that's crazy to me. Those guys are not better than average quarterbacks, and 2 of the 3 don't even have a track record of being that good. And so I think Mitch Trubisky is a little bit of a luxury for this team. And now, like, Mitch Trubisky's contract doesn't look that bad. I mean, would you rather have Daniel Jones for $40 million or Mitch for 10? I don't know. Give me Mitch for 10. Like, that's kind of a no-brainer. Like, they're almost the same guy. I don't know what I would want. So I did not think that Mitch Trubisky would have much trade value, just because I didn't think there would be a lot of teams looking to add a quarterback with his season. But, man, seeing the prices of free agents, I might be reevaluating that stance. He might be a guy that has some value if they want to make a trade. And either way, I think we can look at what the Steelers are spending on quarterbacks. Third quarterback situation, I'm assuming they're just either going to sign somebody for the minimum or draft a young guy. Did one of those mock draft things, and Clayton Tune from Houston fell all the way into the 7th round. I was like, yeah, give me him. He's all right. But one of those, they're going to take care of that third quarterback spot. But you look at what the Steelers are spending on those 2 guys, even though I think Mitch is a little bit expensive for a backup quarterback, it's really not that bad. Like, they're at a competitive advantage what they're spending on the quarterback position and really their entire offensive skill position. I put on Twitter today, you could have Kenny, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, Deontay Johnson, and George Pickens for like $12.7 million less than Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
Like, give me that. Like, give me that off. So, I mean, they've got a real opportunity while they have a cheap quarterback here. I think that it should, more than anything else, be a little bit of a, hey, don't make this rebuild take too long, because this only lasts for 5 years, right? Like, you got 4 more cheap quarterback seasons with Kenny Pickett, depending on how things go. For all we know, at the end of 4 years, nobody will want Kenny Pickett. But, I mean, certainly, I get you. You're not going to have more than that where you have a good quarterback who's on this rookie deal. So make it count. Like, this should be the reopening of this window as soon as possible, basically, because of that advantage.
We see Geno Smith get paid. We see Daniel Jones get paid. Deshaun Watson got a fully guaranteed contract. Lamar Jackson's trying to get a fully guaranteed contract. There's all these aggressive moves in the quarterback market going on right now. Is this just going to be the trajectory of the NFL, or do you feel like there's going to be a bite back on this? Because like we're already seeing, like, Deshaun Watson's contract, Lamar Jackson wants a similar type of deal reportedly, and the Ravens are like, absolutely not. And the whole league is trying to push back against this. It appears right now, because they don't want fully guaranteed contracts to become the norm for anybody, and even quarterbacks. And it looks like to me that there's going to be some blowback on teams. And I wonder if we go across, like, let's say at the end of Kenny Pickett's deal, so 4 years later, we're sitting here, and teams like the Giants, like the Seahawks, like all these teams that have paid all this money, including the Browns, let's say none of that worked out because they were so hamstrung by those contracts that it didn't work out for them. I'm not so sure the NFL has a complete turnaround and says, you know what, we're going to be a little more cautious about it. But it does make me wonder if, like, that becomes a bargaining chip that the Steelers use, or everyone starts using, like, hey, you know what? Overpaying quarterbacks has become a major theme, and it's cost a lot of teams, and we're going to operate this way when it comes to paying our quarterbacks. Granted, though, if Kenny Pickett becomes a great quarterback for the Steelers and he's leading them to, playoff runs and, maybe even a shot at the Super Bowl, if the rebuild goes right, then it kind of puts that into perspective. You're like, you know what? He's kind of been the guy, we have to pay him. So I wonder how this trajectory is going to go for how quarterbacks are getting paid more and more lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been some pushback about the contract that Deshaun Watson got. I think there needed to be. I think it was a bad contract for the Browns. Both.
Same.
I mean, I'm not personally opposed to a quarterback getting guaranteed money. I think it's probably a good thing. But I don't think he, as a person or as a player, deserved that contract at that time. Like, it just didn't make sense. He was a whole year from playing. He was multiple years removed from, like, really playing well.
Yeah.
And then, the off the field stuff over his head at that time, we've seen how that should affect players' value. Like, we've seen guys run out of the league. Go turn on the XFL and watch Martavis Bryant and tell me that off the field stuff doesn't matter to a player's value and the way they're perceived by the league. It absolutely does. And so, like, I think that's the biggest issue right now, is that what you're seeing from these owners, and you call it collusion if you want, whatever, but I just think it's a reaction that this contract that Lamar Jackson is holding up as the example that he wants to earn. The rest of the league is saying that was dumb and we're not going to participate in that. But I have not seen a repudiation of mid-tier guys getting paid way more than I think they're worth. And I'm not sure where we're headed down that road. I think, to me, it's a copycat league, and it will take one team just drawing a line in the sand and saying, you know what? We don't want to spend a lot of money on a quarterback. Give me some scrubby vet for like 10 mil, and we have a really good team, and we think we can make it work with our scheme and the talent we can put them around him. If some team does that and wins, then I think you'll see this whole paradigm shift. But before that happening, I think we're just going to keep seeing what we've been seeing.
It's going to be interesting, man. I've always loved the context of just looking at how rosters are constructed. Everyone's been about the quarterback, but if you could put a team together that's, has a good to decent quarterback, maybe not a super elite quarterback, kind of like how the Eagles did. The Jalen Hurts was a good to very good quarterback who
Were the
wasn't
Browns
elite,
worse
but
with
he was
Jacoby
making.
Brissett than they were with Deshaun Watson?
I mean, that's a very good question.
No,
last
they
year.
were just as good, right? He made 1.5% as much. Like, give me Jacoby Brissett this year. Find out where he's going to. The team that signs him, I like where they're at right now in this conversation.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, what else you got cooking for us? And let people know you can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
SteelersNow.com for all the Steelers stuff, all the social handles down there, and just running out the rest of these draft prospects from the Senior Bowl and the Combine, just putting together that whole process, and then really starting to dig into free agency and who's out there now that we have the full list. Now the franchise tags are done, and man, that's right around the corner. Starts next week, so off season's moving along.
Yes, it does, and we're excited to do that. You can catch all the coverage there at SteelersNow.com, but you can also get it right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, your daily Monday through Friday podcast on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover all things Pitt athletics. I'm here in Greensboro, North Carolina, covering the Pitt's advance through the ACC tournament. They've made it to the third round. We'll see if that run can continue later today if you're watching this on Thursday as they take on Duke at 2:30 p.m. I'll be here for that. But I'll also be keeping up with the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're looking to have Jenna Harner on for the Friday episode tomorrow. We'll see you then right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again for tuning in.